It started with a laugh. Not mine. Hers. We were at a backyard barbecue. Our barbecue, in fact. Smoke from the grill drifted upward into a golden June evening, the kind of suburban calm that tricks you into thinking nothing could ever go wrong. I stood by the coals, beer in hand, flipping burgers while my wife, Rachel, was across the patio talking to him. Evan. I'd heard his name before, too many times. Evan said this. Evan helped me with that. Evan found the funniest meme today. At first, he was just a footnote in conversations. Her best friend from college. A quick mention during dinner. A text notification that popped up while we watched a movie. Nothing I'd call alarming. But like weeds through concrete, he began showing up in the cracks. At first, it was harmless lunches. Then, inside jokes. Then, Evan started appearing in our weekend plans uninvited. That night, he casually clapped me on the back, holding a craft beer like he was born in my backyard. Hope you don't mind me crashing, he said, flashing me that effortless grin. The kind of grin women call charming and men call punchable. Your wife and I are partners in crime, after all. Partners in crime. The words hit me like a slap masked in a joke. Rachel, standing next to him, laughed too loudly. Her hand brushed his arm. She didn't even glance at me. I forced a chuckle, flipping a burger that didn't need flipping, and mumbled, "The more, the merrier." But I didn't feel merry. I felt replaced. That night, after the guests had gone and the scent of grilled meat clung to the cushions, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Rachel was in the guest room, again. She said my snoring had gotten worse. I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing weeks ago. I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Her voice stopped me at the hallway. It was soft, intimate. I realized she was on the phone, her voice barely above a whisper, yet warm and alive in a way I hadn't heard in months. I stayed quiet in the shadows, half hating myself for it. "You just get me," she said, followed by a soft giggle that sounded nothing like the woman who used to slap my shoulder and roll her eyes at my dad jokes. Better than anyone. I backed away slowly. My hand clenched the glass so hard I thought it might shatter. I didn't say a word to her that night, but something cracked open inside me. The next morning, I asked casually, "You talk to Evan a lot these days?" She didn't even look up from her yogurt. "He's one of my closest friends, babe," she replied, spooning another mouthful. "You know that?" "Yeah, but every day? Sometimes late at night?" Rachel rolled her eyes and stood to rinse her bowl. "God, you sound paranoid." "Just asking. Are we really doing this?" She spun around. "Evan is like a brother to me. I've told you that 100 times. I wanted to ask, do you whisper to your brother about how he gets you better than anyone? But I didn't. I let her retreat to her office without another word. The next week was worse. Evan was suddenly part of everything. A brunch with Rachel's old high school friends? Evan was there. Drinks on Friday night with her coworkers? Evan. The escape room date night we'd been planning for months? She invited Evan without even asking. "You'll like him more if you just get to know him," she said when I bristled. I didn't know him. I knew the way he touched her waist as they laughed. I knew the way he texted her during dinner. I knew the way she smiled at her phone and didn't even try to hide it anymore. And yet, I stayed silent. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That maybe modern marriages really did include emotional intimacy with best friends of the opposite sex. Maybe I was the dinosaur. Maybe I was just insecure. Still, one evening I scrolled through her Instagram while she showered. A recent post. A photo of a latte with a heart-shaped foam art, captioned, "The best part of my day. Hashtag partner in crime." There was no mention of me, just Evan's like and his comment. Always. My throat tightened. I locked her phone and tossed it back on the nightstand before she returned. That Friday, we were supposed to have dinner together. She said she'd be late. Work thing. I waited until 9:45 before giving up and eating alone. At 10:22, she came in, smelling like perfume that wasn't hers. A male laugh echoed from her phone before she silenced it. "Sorry, babe," she said. "Evan and I got caught up talking. Lost track of time." She kissed my cheek absently, already walking toward the stairs. I sat there, the half-eaten lasagna growing cold on the plate. The only warmth in the room was from the wine I hadn't finished. I stared at the flickering TV, but wasn't watching. My wife had just spent the night with another man. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. Goddamn, it already felt like cheating. Later that night, I lay in bed again, sleep a distant possibility. Through the thin walls, I heard her voice again. Soft, playful, laughing. And I knew who it was. I knew what it meant. I wasn't her partner anymore. He was. I didn't bring it up right away. I waited. Waited through another brunch where Evan showed up halfway through, joking that Rachel couldn't get through her Eggs Benedict without him. Waited through another text she angled away from me. Waited through another quiet dinner where my questions sat on the table between us, untouched like the cold wine in her glass. But I couldn't wait forever. It was late one night when I finally said it. We were lying in bed, her side glowing faintly from her phone's screen, my side cast in the dim orange hue of the bedside lamp. She was scrolling, half smiling at something she wasn't sharing. I cleared my throat. Can I ask you something? Rachel didn't look up. Do you think maybe Evan's around a little too much? Now she looked at me, slowly, as if I'd just farted in church. What? I'm just saying, he's been part of every conversation, every plan. He's kind of taken over your life. She blinked. Then came the laugh, short, incredulous. Are you serious right now? I'm just being honest. She sat up in bed, tossing the phone onto the nightstand like it had personally offended her. He's my best friend, Liam. He's been there for me since college. What exactly are you accusing me of? I'm not accusing you of anything, I said carefully. I'm telling you how it feels. Rachel narrowed her eyes. It feels like jealousy. That's what it sounds like to me. I sat up too. Do you think it's totally normal to call your friend late at night and whisper things like, "You get me better than anyone"? Her lips parted, but not in shock. In annoyance. Were you spying on me? I walked past the hallway, Rachel. I heard you. I didn't go digging. She shook her head, exasperated. You're twisting this. You always do this when you feel insecure. You read into things and make them bigger than they are. There it was. Insecure. The buzzword of modern gaslighting. Okay, I said more quietly now. Let me ask you something. If I said that to another woman, if I texted her every day, made plans with her more than you, whispered late-night conversations, would that be okay with you? Rachel didn't answer. She stood, crossed her arms, and started pacing the room like she was preparing for court. I can't believe you're making me justify a friendship, she said. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You always act like you're chill and open-minded, but the moment something challenges your control, you act threatened. My control? I said, stunned. This isn't about control. This is about respect. No, she said, pointing a finger at me. This is about you being threatened by the idea that I have someone else to talk to besides you. God forbid I have a connection with someone that doesn't revolve around laundry and what's for dinner. That one cut deep. I sat there, stunned silent. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease with which she said them. The conviction. She truly believed I was the villain here. The insecure, controlling husband. The dinosaur who couldn't handle a modern marriage. She climbed back into bed, turned away from me, and muttered, "Grow up." Over the next few days, she dialed the manipulation up to a frequency only dogs and guilty spouses could hear. "You'll be home early, right?" she'd say sweetly. "Evan and I were thinking of hitting that new tapas place downtown, and I don't want you waiting up." Or, "Evan's so good at this stuff," when the garage door jammed and I was on my knees trying to fix it. Then came the jokes. The casual ones. "You should hang out with Evan sometime," she said one night. "Maybe you'd learn how to relax." Or worse, "You two are so different. He just gets people." I didn't even know how to respond. Every attempt at addressing it became a trap. "I don't know, Liam," she said during one failed conversation. "Maybe you're just not as emotionally available as he is." "Oh, I'm sorry," I snapped. "Next time you need emotional support, I'll try whispering it to you at midnight while your husband lies in the next room." Jesus, Liam, you're being obsessive. That word. That loaded word. Obsessive. Paranoid. Possessive. Insecure. Toxic. She was building a fortress of buzzwords, and I was getting buried beneath it. One afternoon, I picked up her phone by accident. She left it on the table, screen face up. My thumb grazed it when I moved a stack of papers. The screen lit up. "Can't wait to see you tonight. From Evan." I stared at the screen. No emojis. No full sentences. Just that one casual text that said everything. She walked into the room and saw me holding the phone. Her face changed. "Seriously?" she snapped. "You're checking my phone now?" "It lit up," I said. "I didn't. That's private, Liam." I tossed it onto the couch. "Then keep it away from me if you don't want me seeing your boyfriend's messages." "Oh my God." She laughed bitterly. "You are so dramatic." It's a wink emoji. He sends that to everyone. No, he doesn't, I said. And you know he doesn't. She pointed a finger at me again, her eyes flashing. You don't get to police who I talk to. You don't get to decide which friends I have. This isn't the 1950s, Liam. Grow the hell up. She stormed upstairs, leaving me standing there, breathless. My hands were shaking, not from rage. From disbelief. How had this become my life? How had I become the bad guy? That night, she went to dinner with Evan. Said it was just to catch up. I didn't ask questions. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, sure, have fun. Then I poured a whiskey and stared at the empty chair across from me. Our dog, Jasper, sat quietly by my feet, watching the door as if she might still come back before midnight like she used to. I pet his head and whispered, it's not just in my head, right? Jasper wagged his tail. Loyal. Still there. Still believing in me. It was more than I could say for my wife. The next morning, I found a photo on Instagram. Rachel and Evan, side by side, toasting wine glasses. Caption, great minds drink alike. Hashtag partner in crime. It wasn't just the words. It was the look in her eyes. Bright. Alive. Full of light I hadn't seen in years. And I realized I wasn't the only one she'd stopped seeing. She had stopped seeing me. The office break room smelled like burnt coffee and microwave curry, but it was quieter than the bullpen, and that was all I needed. I sat at the corner table, stabbing at a limp salad I wasn't hungry for, scrolling through Rachel's Instagram like a masochist. There she was, again, with Evan. This time, they were laughing in a boomerang loop at a food truck. The caption, who needs a husband when your bestie knows your order by heart? Hashtag ride or die. I didn't even feel the sting anymore. I just felt numb. Is that today's crisis or yesterday's leftovers? I looked up. She was standing by the coffee pot, her lanyard slightly askew, her dark hair pulled into a messy bun. Hannah, the new hire. Sharp wit, quiet eyes. I'd barely spoken to her since she started 2 weeks ago, but I'd noticed the way she kept her head down during chaos and still managed to smirk at the absurdity of it all. I gave a half shrug. Probably both. She smirked and grabbed a mug, tipping it toward me. Want a refill, sad salad? I cracked a real smile. First one in a while. Sure, if you're brave enough to drink that stuff. She poured 2 cups and sat across from me like it wasn't a big deal, like we were co-workers who always had lunch together. So, she said, stirring way too much sugar into her coffee. Whose life are you hate stalking? I nearly choked. Excuse me. She nodded toward my phone. I've seen that face. I've made that face. That's the face of someone looking at a life that used to include them. I set my phone down, face down. That obvious, huh? You look like a guy who's been punched in the soul, she said, sipping casually. No offense. None taken, I said, then hesitated. My wife's best friend is becoming less friend and more everything else. Hannah's expression didn't change, but her eyes lost some of their teasing sharpness. Oof. Been there. I blinked. Really? She nodded. My ex cheated with his best friend. Her name was Cassie. They used to call each other soulmates. Took me a year to realize I was the third wheel in my own relationship. That sounds exactly like what I'm living. She gave a small, almost sad smile. People love to hide behind the word friendship. Makes betrayal easier to excuse. We sat in silence for a few seconds, the coffee between us going cold. It felt strange, how easy it was to talk to her. How seen I felt. With Rachel, everything had turned into a lecture. With Hannah, I didn't even have to explain the punchline. You ever feel like you're slowly disappearing from your own life? I asked. All the time, she said, then leaned back. But at least I got custody of the dog. I laughed. Actually laughed. Loud enough that a guy walking past gave us a look. Hannah raised her mug to me. To the invisible ones, she said. I raised mine. To the ones who see them. That lunch turned into another a few days later. And then another. We never made a plan. It just started happening. Sometimes it was burgers. Sometimes it was vending machine snacks on the back stairs. Once, she brought in homemade banana bread because she felt like being someone's grandma. She told me about her son, Charlie, 6 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs and absolutely convinced he would grow up to be a paleontologist who moonlighted as a superhero. I told her about how Rachel and I used to talk about kids, but it always became someday, and now someday had turned into silence. She said I was funny in a dry, sad way. I said she laughed like she wasn't supposed to. like her joy kept escaping before her past could catch it. Every conversation with her felt like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Like I'd been underwater, and she was the first person to notice I was drowning. One Tuesday, after a morning meeting that could have been an email, I found her in the stairwell again, eating yogurt and reading a paperback. "What's the book?" I asked. She held up the cover. "Gone Girl." I raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Only if you start cheating on me with your best friend," she deadpanned. We locked eyes. For a beat too long. Neither of us said a word. Then she smiled and turned back to her book, but her ears were pink. I walked away smiling. That Friday, I stayed late to finish a report. The office was mostly empty, the hum of the HVAC the only company. As I packed up, my phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. "Going to dinner with Evan. Just the two of us. Don't wait up. Not love you. Not see you later. Just a factual statement." Like I was a roommate she owed a heads up to. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I texted Hannah. "You hungry?" Her reply came 2 seconds later. "Always." We met at this greasy little burger joint 3 blocks from the office. Red booths, sticky tables, fries that could kill you, but it was perfect. She was already there, wearing a hoodie and jeans, hair down, glasses on. She looked nothing like the version of her I'd seen at work. More real, more grounded, more her. We talked for hours. About dumb movies. About how her son once drew a dinosaur with boobs and proudly named it Bulbasaurus. About how she used to want to be a writer, but got scared of rejection. I told her about how I used to cook, really cook, for Rachel, until she started ordering DoorDash with Evan and said she didn't have time for sit-down meals. "Food's not just fuel," I said. "It's memory. It's care." Hannah nodded. "Exactly. It's love in edible form." By the time the place closed, we were still laughing in the parking lot, leaning against my car, not ready to leave. No touching, no flirting, nothing crossed. But something shifted. We looked at each other too long, smiled too softly. I glanced at her lips once. She noticed. She didn't lean in. Neither did I. But something unspoken passed between us like a spark in the dark. Not a fire. Not yet. But the match had been struck. When I got home, Rachel was already in bed, smiling at her phone. She didn't look up when I walked in. She didn't ask where I'd been. And for the first time, I didn't offer an explanation. The next morning, Rachel greeted me with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You sleep okay?" she asked, stirring her coffee. "Fine," I said, pouring my own. "You?" She stretched, her robe slipping slightly to reveal a hint of shoulder. Calculated, practiced. "Yeah, Evan and I got back kind of late. We lost track of time." "Of course you did." I nodded, casually sipping my coffee like it didn't taste bitter from her words. "That's nice," I said. "I grabbed burgers with someone after work, too." She looked up, just a flicker of curiosity, no more than a twitch behind the eyes. "Oh, who?" "Hannah, from work." A beat. Then she smiled, but it was tight. "That new girl? The single mom?" I shrugged. "She's funny, smart. We just talked." Rachel sipped her drink, eyes lingering on me for a moment too long. "You never mentioned you were close." "We weren't. I guess we are now." For a moment, the kitchen felt like a battlefield. No raised voices. No weapons. Just 2 people smiling through their teeth, hiding knives behind their backs. After that, the rhythm of our marriage shifted. She would mention Evan more deliberately, with just enough edge to make it feel intentional. "Evan recommended this wine," she'd say, pouring 2 glasses, only one for herself. "He has such a refined palate." I'd respond in kind. "Hannah said the same thing about that show," I'd reply. "She has surprisingly good taste." Our conversations became landmines, casual phrases layered with subtext, compliments with a sharp bite, questions that weren't really questions. Rachel started dressing differently, tighter jeans, deeper necklines. Evan's laugh appeared more often in our home than my own. And me? I started showing up to work early. I shaved more. I switched from polos to dress shirts. I started texting Hannah more than I should have. Not flirting. Not yet. But the messages were steady. Comforting. She listened. She responded. She cared. And Rachel noticed. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find Rachel standing in front of the mirror near the entryway, adjusting her earrings. She wore a white blouse tucked into a high-waisted skirt that hugged every inch of her like it was custom-made. "You look nice," I said. She smiled. Thanks. Evan and I are hitting the art museum. He got tickets to the new exhibit. Didn't we talk about going to that one together? I asked. She waved a hand, already reaching for her keys. We can still go. He brought it up first. Of course he did. I nodded, stepping aside. Have fun. As she walked out the door, her perfume lingered like an afterthought I wasn't meant to question. I watched her car pull away and pulled out my phone. You hungry? I typed. Hannah's reply came before I could even walk to the kitchen. Always. We met at this diner tucked between a laundromat and a comic book store. Nothing special, but it had these warm, ugly yellow booths that made you feel like time didn't move as fast inside. She smiled when she saw me, that natural, crooked smile that didn't feel like it had been rehearsed. You again, she said. Don't act like you're not thrilled. She laughed. You're right. I live for lukewarm coffee and someone who understands sarcasm. We talked for hours. About nothing. About everything. She told me about Charlie losing his first tooth and how the tooth fairy almost forgot until midnight. I told her about how Rachel used to write little notes and slip them into my coat pocket when we first got married, and how I hadn't found one in years. And somewhere between the second refill and the shared slice of cherry pie, she touched my hand without thinking. Just a quick brush of her fingers against mine. She didn't pull away. Neither did I. We sat in my car after the diner closed, neither of us ready to leave. It wasn't sexual. Not yet. But emotionally. Lines blurred. Wants hummed between us like unspoken radio static. She leaned her head against the window, watching the drizzle trail down the glass. Do you ever wonder when it started falling apart? I swallowed hard. Every day. She looked over at me, her voice barely above a whisper. You deserve someone who sees you. I stared at her, heart pounding. So do you. Silence. Just breathing. Just tension. Just proximity. Our hands rested inches apart on the console. I could have kissed her. I wanted to, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I said, we should go. And she nodded, not disappointed. Just understanding. We drove home separately. When I walked into the house, Rachel was sitting on the couch, one leg curled beneath her, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. You were out late. So were you. She shrugged. Museum turned into drinks. Evan wanted to talk about some stuff. Right? I said, setting down my keys. You two have a lot of stuff lately. She finally looked at me. You know, for someone who keeps bringing up my friendship, you sure spend a lot of time with your new little work buddy. She has a name, I replied. And she's not little anything. She's a friend. Rachel smirked. Interesting how quickly that happened. Interesting how quickly you've forgotten who your husband is. The room went still. Her smile faded. We're just friends, she said sharply. So are we, I said, walking upstairs. I didn't look back. That night, I lay in bed alone, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't followed me, hadn't asked questions, hadn't fought. And somehow that silence hurt more than yelling ever could. Because the war wasn't loud anymore. It was subtle, calculated. A quiet game of chess where every move said, I can do this too. We didn't talk about it. Not the museum. Not the diner. Not Hannah. Not Evan. Not the fact that my wife had started using perfume again, or that I now triple-checked my shirt for wrinkles before heading out in the morning. What we did instead was engage in a cold, unspoken war, played out in half-smiles and sharp remarks, invisible to anyone watching from the outside. We were still sleeping in the same bed, but it didn't feel like a marriage anymore. It felt like a long, slow negotiation over who would blink first. Evan thinks we should do a wine tasting in Sonoma this fall, Rachel said one morning while pouring almond milk into her smoothie. Oh yeah, I replied, barely glancing up from my cereal. Maybe Hannah and I can go apple picking with her son. He's 6. Smart kid. Rachel didn't answer immediately. She placed the blender lid on just a little harder than necessary and hit the switch, drowning out the room with the low roar of spinning blades. That was the pattern. She'd say Evan, I'd say Hannah. She'd talk about how Evan just gets art, how he always knows what wine to pick, how thoughtful he was to bring her almond croissants last Tuesday. I'd mention how Hannah loves horror movies, how her laugh made work meetings tolerable, how she brought me homemade banana bread just because. Neither of us said what we were actually saying, but we both heard it, loud and clear. Rachel started staying out later. She said it was book club, except she never used to read crime thrillers, and I knew for a fact that The Silent Patient, wasn't about a woman laughing over cocktails with a man she claimed was just a friend. Meanwhile, I started getting to work earlier, even on days I didn't need to. I didn't realize it at first, but I was dressing better, choosing shirts that fit closer to my chest, keeping my stubble just right, adding cologne I hadn't worn since our second anniversary. And every time Hannah smiled at me, complimented a tie, laughed at a dumb joke I didn't expect to land, I felt it. The thing I'd forgotten I needed. To be seen. Rachel noticed. She didn't say it directly, but she started inspecting me more closely before I left for work. Her eyes lingered a second longer on my collar, my hair, my smile. Once, she leaned against the doorway as I buttoned my shirt and said, "You never used to care this much about how you looked for spreadsheets." I turned and smiled. People change. She smirked. Must be some very interesting spreadsheets. I shrugged. Or maybe I just liked the attention. Our eyes locked in the mirror. Nothing more was said. But the gauntlet had been thrown. On Saturday, I made pancakes for breakfast. An old ritual we hadn't done in months. She walked in, sleepy-eyed, wearing one of my t-shirts, and paused. "You're making pancakes?" "Felt like it," I said, flipping one perfectly golden. Besides, Charlie, Hannah's son, told me mine were better than his mom's. Figured I'd make sure he was right. Rachel sat down slowly. "You're really close with them, huh?" I kept my tone even. "It's nice. Feeling appreciated." She didn't respond. Just sipped her coffee and stared out the window. After a minute, she said, "Evan might come by later. He's helping me organize the closet." I didn't look up. "You ever think maybe Evan likes playing husband more than he lets on?" She didn't answer. Just stood, grabbed her mug, and walked out of the kitchen. That night, I didn't come home right after work. I didn't lie, either. I just didn't rush. Hannah and I grabbed Thai food and ate it in her car while watching the sunset from a parking lot above the city. We talked about nothing. Music, food, her son's upcoming parent-teacher conference. And then, quietly, she said, "You know what I miss the most?" "What?" "Just being chosen. No hesitation. No triangle. Just someone saying you. It's always been you." I looked at her, feeling the ache in my chest pulse in rhythm with her words. "I miss that too," I said. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch. But the space between us felt charged, like the static before a lightning strike. When I got home, Rachel was sitting on the couch in yoga pants and a tank top, a blanket around her shoulders. "You're late," she said, not looking up from her glass of wine. "I told you I had a thing," I replied, dropping my keys. "With her. With someone who listens." She turned to look at me then, the challenge back in her eyes. "Are you trying to punish me?" "No," I said. "I think we're both just tired of being invisible." She stood, walked over, and stood inches from me. "Do you want me to be jealous? Do you want me to believe Evan's just a friend?" We stared at each other in silence. Then she whispered, "You've changed. So have you." And we stood there, two strangers in the same home, both pretending the ground beneath us wasn't cracking louder by the day. Over the next few days, we became professionals at pretending. We kissed on the cheek like a show for invisible cameras. We laughed at dinner parties with friends like everything was fine. We coordinated schedules for errands like roommates with a Google Calendar. But in private, the war raged. If she left her phone face down, I left mine open to a text from Hannah. If she mentioned Evan's insightful thoughts on relationships, I quoted something deep Hannah had said about emotional intimacy. It wasn't about trust anymore. It was about territory. It wasn't about love. It was about leverage. One night, I caught her in the bathroom mirror, staring at herself longer than usual. Her fingers lingered at the corners of her eyes, brushing invisible lines. She saw me in the reflection but didn't turn. Quietly, she said, "Do you still think I'm beautiful?" I walked to the door and leaned against it. "I think you know you are," I said. "But I think you miss hearing it from me." She looked down, nodded once, and said nothing. And that was somehow sadder than anything else. We were at war, and neither of us was winning. The night it all shifted was a Thursday. It had rained all day, that kind of stubborn drizzle that soaks you even if you're under an umbrella. The world felt dimmed down, dulled, like someone had turned the saturation down on life. Rachel came downstairs in jeans and a black sweater, tugging on her boots by the door. "Movie night with Evan," she said casually, like it was just another item on her to-do list. I was sitting at the dining table, flipping through the day's mail, pretending I wasn't waiting for her to say something more. She didn't. "Which movie?" I asked, keeping my voice even. She shrugged, grabbing her bag. He said something foreign and depressing. Probably French. Sounds romantic. She paused. A second too long. Then, with a sigh, don't do that. I'm not doing anything. You're implying. No, I said, standing now. I'm noticing. Rachel's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Just pulled on her coat, opened the door, and disappeared into the rain. And just like that, it hit me. Whatever we had left wasn't a marriage. It was a stalemate. And I was done playing that kind of game. The call came an hour later. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through Netflix, not watching anything, when my phone buzzed. Hannah, can you help me? There was no punctuation, no emoji, no sarcasm, just those 4 words. I replied instantly. What's wrong? She called instead of texting. Her voice was shaky. I'm stuck off the 12, just past the exit. Flat tire or something worse. I've got Charlie in the back. It's raining, and I'm on my way, I said, already grabbing my keys. When I found them, they were pulled off to the shoulder, emergency lights blinking like a silent SOS. Hannah was standing outside the driver's side with her hood up, soaked to the knees. Charlie sat in the back seat, coloring, headphones on, completely unfazed. Thank God, she said as I pulled up behind her. No one stopped. A few honked, she said with a bitter laugh. Which was super helpful. I knelt to look at the tire. Blown. Completely. I'll get the spare, I said. You and Charlie get in my car. It's warm. She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes later, I was soaked and swearing under my breath, but I had the tire changed. She sat in the passenger seat of my car, her hair damp, her hands wrapped around a travel mug I'd forgotten I left in there. Charlie was dozing in the back seat, bundled in his Dino print jacket. You didn't have to come, she said softly. Yes, I did. She turned her face toward me, eyes wet, but not from the rain anymore. I was scared, she admitted. Not just of the highway, of calling someone, of needing help, of not knowing who to trust. You called me, I said. She smiled faintly. Yeah, I guess I did. We sat in silence, watching the rain trail down the windshield like thin silver veins. And then she said something I didn't expect. I haven't let a man into my house since my ex left. I looked over at her. Hannah, you don't have to say anything, she cut in gently. I'm not asking for anything. Just you showed up. That's rare. I took a breath, then asked, you want company? Just until the storm dies down? She hesitated, then nodded. Her house was small, warm, filled with toys and books and half-done art projects. The walls weren't perfectly painted and the furniture didn't match, but it felt more like home than my own did. Charlie went straight to bed without complaint. She poured us tea in mismatched mugs, and we sat on her couch, still damp from the rain. I used to think needing someone was weakness, she said, staring into her cup. It's not, I said. It's human. She looked at me, really looked. What do you need, Liam? The question hung there like a dare. I could have lied, could have deflected, could have made some joke about coffee or silence. But I didn't. I need someone who sees me, I said. Who wants me, not just out of habit or guilt. Someone who doesn't make me feel like I'm constantly losing a fight I didn't start. She didn't respond, just reached out and took my hand. No words, just fingers lacing through mine, like she'd been waiting to do it for weeks. I leaned in without thinking. Her breath hitched, and then we paused, close enough to kiss. But we didn't. Somewhere in that pause was clarity. This feels dangerous, she whispered. I nodded. But real. We leaned our foreheads together. No more. Just that. A stillness I hadn't felt in years. A warmth that didn't come from obligation. A closeness that wasn't earned through competition. And it was enough. For now. When I got home, it was nearly midnight. Rachel was asleep on the couch, one arm flung over her head, phone glowing on her chest. I picked it up gently, trying not to wake her. The screen was still unlocked. A message from Evan blinked at the top. You make the nights feel less lonely. I stared at it for a full minute. Then I placed the phone back on her chest, walked upstairs, and shut our bedroom door behind me. Not slammed, just shut. The next morning, the sunlight didn't feel like clarity. It felt like guilt. Rachel was in the kitchen, humming softly while scrambling eggs. An unusual burst of domestic energy I hadn't seen in months. She smiled when I walked in like last night hadn't happened, like I hadn't watched a message from another man glow on her chest like a neon confession. Sleep okay? She asked. Like a rock. She plated breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, and a sprinkle of parsley she never used unless we had company. I sat down slowly, wary. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from me. "Maybe we need to change the energy around here." I raised an eyebrow. "Change it how?" She shrugged. "Rebuild some trust. Break the tension." Interesting coming from someone who spends more time with her friend than her husband. She ignored the jab. "I thought we could have dinner. A double." I blinked. "Like, you and Evan?" "Yeah. You can bring someone too. That Hannah girl you've been seeing." I let the silence stretch. This was a move. A calculated one. She wasn't trying to rebuild anything. She was trying to prove she had nothing to hide. Or worse, she was trying to win. "You sure?" I asked slowly. "That might get awkward." She smiled sweetly, too controlled. "Only if we have something to be awkward about." The night arrived fast. Rachel wore a red dress that clung to her like it was made for nights designed to confuse husbands. Her hair was curled, her perfume subtle but distinct, familiar in a way that stung. "Evan always says this dress is my power move," she said as we walked out. "Of course he does." Hannah met us at the restaurant. Low lighting, jazz in the background, white tablecloths meant to intimidate ketchup lovers. She wore a simple black dress, her hair down, glasses off. Understated. Elegant. And still, when I saw her, my breath caught. She looked nervous but calm, like someone walking into a room full of landmines with her head held high. Evan was already there. Button-down shirt. Too much cologne. That casual confidence that said, "I don't even realize how threatening I am." He stood to greet Rachel with a cheek kiss. Then turned to me. "Liam, man, I've heard so much about you." I shook his hand with a grip that lasted a second too long. "Likewise." Introductions were quick, polite. The waiter arrived like divine intervention, pulling us into menus and wine lists. Then the real dinner began. Everything at that table had two meanings. Every laugh had an edge. Every glance carried a charge. Evan talked too much. About his nonprofit work, his recent trip to Spain, how Rachel helped him shop for a new couch. "She has amazing taste," he said, smiling at her. "She used to," I said, not smiling. Hannah, to her credit, played it cool. Polite but not passive. She asked questions, smiled warmly. But there was steel under her softness. She saw the dynamics instantly. "So you two have known each other how long?" she asked Evan. "College," he said. "We were inseparable." Rachel grinned. "Still are." Hannah sipped her wine, unbothered. "Must be interesting, being so close to someone else's wife." The table stilled for a second. Rachel's smile faltered. Evan laughed awkwardly. "We're like siblings." Hannah nodded slowly. "Sure. If that sibling sometimes sends late-night winks and helps pick out lingerie." Rachel flushed. "Excuse me. I'm just saying," Hannah replied coolly. "Some friendships cross boundaries. Sometimes the people in them pretend not to notice." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I stared at Hannah, and, for the first time, I felt something shift under the table, power tilting. Rachel turned to me, eyes narrowed. "Did you bring her here to attack me?" I set down my fork. "You said you wanted honesty. You invited Evan. I brought someone who actually respects boundaries." "I didn't come here to fight," Hannah added. "I just thought it'd be nice to see what emotional affairs look like up close." Evan scoffed. "That's a bit dramatic." Hannah turned to him with that same quiet fire I was beginning to crave. "Is it? Because the way you look at her doesn't scream platonic. And the way she lights up around you? That's not how wives look at friends. That's how they look at options." Rachel stood suddenly, napkin falling to the floor. "Okay, this was a mistake." She grabbed her purse, eyes flicking to me. "You've turned our marriage into a circus." "No," I said calmly. "You did that when you stopped being honest with me." Evan stood, flustered, unsure whether to follow her or stay. Rachel didn't wait for him to decide. She walked out, and this time, she didn't look back. The silence after they left was deafening. I stared at the door. Hannah placed her hand over mine gently. "That was brutal," I said. She nodded. "But necessary." We sat in that half-empty restaurant while the band played something soft and slow. The kind of song that once would have made me think of Rachel. Now it just sounded like something from another life. When I got home, the house was dark. Her heels were by the door, her purse on the table. She was upstairs, I assumed. Maybe crying, maybe fuming. But I didn't go up. I didn't ask. I just sat in the living room, lit only by the hallway light, and stared at nothing. The war had been quiet for too long. Tonight, The dam had broken. And beneath the wreckage, I could finally see what was left standing. Me. The next day was quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet, like the breath before a scream. Like the moment when everything is too still, and you start to wonder if the floor beneath you is about to give. Rachel didn't speak to me that morning. She didn't leave me a note. No text. No eye contact. Just the sound of cabinets opening harder than necessary and the clink of her spoon against the bowl. It was all commentary. And I didn't push. Not because I didn't care anymore, but because I was starting to understand just how much I had been pushing. For months, maybe years, trying to get her to see me, to choose me, to fight for us. Now, let her make the next move. That night, she poured wine. 3 glasses in, she finally spoke. I invited Evan over, she said, her voice light. Controlled. I looked up from the book I wasn't reading. You sure that's a good idea? Thought you hated surprises. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't take the bait. I just think he deserves a chance to explain himself. After Hannah's little monologue. Monologue, I echoed. You mean the part where she called out the emotional affair you've been pretending isn't happening? Rachel rolled her eyes. Jesus, Liam. You're such a martyr. No, I said, setting the book down. I'm just done being quiet. Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. Rachel stood, smoothed her dress, and walked to the door like she was stepping onto a stage. Evan looked annoyingly comfortable, like he belonged, which, frankly, infuriated me. Hey, man, he said, giving me that same smug smile from the dinner. No hard feelings about last night. I gestured toward the wine. Help yourself. You're clearly part of the family. He chuckled like I'd made a joke. Rachel brought out another glass and poured it herself. Full. No hesitation. We all sat in the living room. The air was thick with tension. I could smell it between the citrus of her perfume and the oak of his cologne. So, Evan said after a sip, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Rachel and I are close. Yes, but it's always been just friends. I raised an eyebrow. Friends who send each other midnight texts and share vacations that don't include the husband? Rachel cut in. Don't twist it. No twisting, I said. I'm just quoting. Evan leaned forward, suddenly more serious. Look, man, I respect your relationship. I've always respected it. You respect it so much you replaced me in it. That shut him up for a moment. Rachel stood abruptly, pacing the room. This is pointless. We're just going in circles. Because you won't admit what's real, I said. She turned sharply. What do you want me to say, Liam? That I was lonely? That I felt like a ghost in this house? That Evan made me laugh when you stopped trying? There it was. A breathless silence fell. She looked at me then, not angry, but exhausted. You check out of a marriage for long enough, someone's going to fill the space. I swallowed. That works both ways. She blinked. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. You want to talk about neglect? About disappearing? You haven't touched me in months, Rachel. You spend more time texting him than talking to me. And when I finally find someone who listens, you accuse me of betrayal. Because it is betrayal, she snapped. You confided in her. You built a connection behind my back. And what the hell have you been doing? I shouted, standing now. Don't act like I'm the villain in a story you co-wrote. Evan raised a hand. Okay, maybe this is getting. Shut up, Evan, I snapped. You're not the referee here. He backed down. Finally, Rachel's voice was quiet now. I didn't mean to hurt you. But you did, I said. And you keep doing it. She looked down at her glass, turning it slowly in her hands. Evan stood. Maybe I should go. I didn't answer. Rachel didn't stop him. He walked out without another word. After the door closed, she sat back on the couch, shoulders slumped. I didn't plan this, she said softly. It just happened. I needed someone. I sat across from her, not angry anymore. Just tired. So did I said. You used to be that person. And when you stopped, I waited. I waited and waited, hoping you'd turn around. Hoping you'd notice I was fading. Her eyes were wet now. You think I didn't notice? I just didn't know how to fix it. You don't fix a wound by pretending it's not bleeding. She let out a shaky breath, wiping her cheek. Maybe we broke this together. Maybe, I said. Silence again. Then she whispered, do you still love me? I didn't answer right away. I thought about the answer I should give. But the truth was complicated. I love what we were, I said. I'm not sure I love what we've become. That was the most honest thing I'd said in years. She nodded slowly, then stood. I'm going to stay at my sister's for a while. Just to think. I didn't stop her. I just nodded. After she left, the house felt emptier than I expected. Not just because she was gone, but because the weight of pretending was gone too. I poured myself a drink and stared out the window. Not relieved, not angry, just quiet. The storm had passed, and now I had to figure out what was left in the wreckage. The first morning without Rachel felt like waking up in a house that didn't know who it belonged to. Her coffee mug was still on the counter, lipstick stained from the night before. Her robe hung on the back of the bedroom door like it was waiting for her shoulders. Her scent lingered on the pillow beside mine. But she was gone. She didn't slam the door when she left. No screaming. No final declaration. Just a bag quietly packed and the hollow sound of the front door clicking shut. She'd gone to her sister's place, just for space. But I didn't call it that. I called it peace. For the first few days, the silence was strange. No background hum of her voice on the phone with Evan. No tension pressing down on my shoulders at every breakfast. No cold glances from across the kitchen island. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore, but I was still walking alone. The house felt bigger than it used to. Too big for one person and his guilt. I didn't text her. She didn't text me. But she left reminders everywhere. Half-used moisturizer in the bathroom, a grocery list on the fridge, her phone charger still plugged in beside the bed. And maybe that was the most painful part. She was gone, but not really. Like a ghost who hadn't decided whether she was haunting me or just forgotten to move on. Then came the messages. Not from her, but from her. Can we talk soon? I didn't mean for any of this to happen like it did. I'm not okay. I miss you. I stared at each one as they came in. Read them. Reread them. Then didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't know what to say. How do you answer someone who's finally whispering the truth after you screamed it for months? Meanwhile, I stopped seeing Hannah. Not because of guilt. Because it felt unfair. After the dinner, after the confrontation, it felt like we'd crossed a line even though we hadn't touched. Not really. She messaged me once. Hope you're okay. No pressure. Just miss talking to you. I typed a dozen replies. Deleted them all. I wanted to see her. God, I missed her. Her presence. Her wit. The calm she brought to every chaotic moment. But my world had been chaos lately, and I didn't want to drag her back into mine. Not until I figured out what was left of it. One night, I sat in the living room with a glass of bourbon and opened the photo album from our wedding. Rachel looked so young then. So bright. Eyes wide with the kind of love that doesn't know how fragile it is. We looked like two people who'd never imagined sitting across a table years later, arguing about emotional fidelity like it was some vague legal term. I stared at a photo of us dancing, her cheek against my chest, my hand around her waist. And I realized something. We weren't lying back then. We just hadn't grown into the truth yet. When Rachel finally came by to pick up some more of her things, we didn't fight. She stood in the doorway, hesitant. I opened the door without a word, let her walk past. She grabbed a few jackets, some books from the shelf, a pair of boots. I've been journaling, she said quietly, not facing me. That's good. In therapy, she added. My sister made me go. Even better. She turned to face me then, her eyes tired. It's hard to see what I became. The version of myself that thought attention was more important than intimacy. That thought Evan's validation meant more than your consistency. I said nothing. What was there left to say? I'm not asking for anything, she continued. Not forgiveness. Not a second chance. Just understanding. I looked at her, really looked. Not as the woman who'd betrayed me, but as the person who'd once promised to love me the way I'd promised to love her. I understand, I said. I also understand that love without honesty isn't love. It's performance. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Then, before leaving, she asked the question I knew would come. Was there something between you and Hannah? I didn't flinch. There could have been, I said. But I never crossed the line. Not physically, but emotionally. I shrugged. You know that answer already. She nodded again. I guess we both looked elsewhere when we stopped being seen. That hit harder than I expected. Because it was true. For a while, things stayed quiet. We exchanged emails about the mortgage. Talked once about what we'd tell our families. A few texts about what she wanted to do with the dog, even though we never had one. And just like that, we were unraveling. Not violently. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like pulling a thread and watching a sweater fall apart in your hands. I started sleeping through the night again. Started eating real meals. Started feeling again, without waiting for her reaction to validate it. It was Hannah I missed most during those early days. Her jokes, her honesty, her ability to cut through bullshit like she was born allergic to pretense. And I realized something. With Rachel, everything had become negotiation. With Hannah, everything had been honest. There was no power struggle, no scoreboard, just two people trying to breathe in a space that had been choking them. One afternoon, I passed Rachel at the grocery store. She was in the cereal aisle, holding a box of granola like it might give her answers. We made eye contact. She gave me a small smile. I nodded once, and we both moved on. No words, no closure speech, just acknowledgement. The kind that says, I see you. I remember, but we're not there anymore. And that was enough. The last real fight we had started with a knock on the door. Not a metaphorical one. An actual, literal knock. It was Rachel, hair tied back, no makeup, wearing the hoodie she used to steal from my side of the closet. She looked younger somehow, like someone who'd finally run out of performances. Hey, she said softly. I stepped aside without speaking, letting her in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd once planned vacations and argued over bills and laughed until we cried. Now, we were strangers with too much history and not enough future. She ran her finger along the rim of her water glass, her voice almost too quiet to hear. I need to tell you something, she said. I didn't flinch. Okay. I keep going over everything in my head. The dinner, the texts, Evan. She looked up. I know what it was. You don't need to convince me anymore. Silence. She continued. It wasn't physical. Not technically. But that doesn't matter, does it? I didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. I fell into something with him, she said. A connection. It felt harmless at first. Friendly. He made me laugh, and I needed that. But then I started needing him more than I should. My chest tightened, but I stayed still. I told myself it was okay, she went on. That I wasn't doing anything wrong. That as long as we didn't sleep together, I hadn't crossed the line. But I did. She looked straight at me. Emotionally, I cheated on you. There it was. Not a bomb. Not a scream. Just the truth. Simple. Clean. Brutal. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling for a second before saying, why now? She exhaled shakily. Because I want to stop lying. To myself. To you. To whatever's left between us. And what is left? I asked. She gave a small, sad smile. Pain. Regret. Guilt. But also love. Somewhere, buried under all the resentment and mistakes, I still love you. The words hit harder than I expected, because part of me still wanted to believe them, but part of me didn't trust them anymore. You love the version of me that didn't ask questions, I said. The one that kept quiet while you faded away and let someone else into our world. I love the version of you that looked at me like I was enough, she whispered. That version was looking for you the whole time, I said. You just weren't looking back. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She stood and paced slowly, arms crossed tight across her chest like armor. I don't know how we got here. I nodded. We stopped showing up. You turned to Evan. I turned to silence. Her eyes flicked to mine. And Hannah? I hesitated. She reminded me what being seen felt like. Rachel winced, like the truth still hurt even when she expected it. Did you love her? I shook my head. No, but I could have. She sat again, quieter now. Smaller. I never wanted to lose you. You didn't lose me, I said gently. You just stopped holding on. That line hung in the air, heavy with finality. She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. I'm not here to beg, she said, or ask for anything. I just wanted to finally say it. To stop pretending we're still pretending. I looked down at the table. The grains in the wood. The scratch from where I dropped my keys in a rage 3 months ago. The candle wax she spilled during one of our anniversary dinners. Memories. Fractures. All of it still there. But dulled now. Quiet. I'm tired, Rachel. Me too. We sat in that mutual exhaustion for a while, letting the quiet be the truest thing between us. Finally, she stood. I'll get the rest of my stuff next week. I nodded. No fight. No plea. Just agreement. She walked to the door. Paused. I'm sorry, she said. I know, I replied. And then she left. After the door shut, I stood there for a long time. Not because I was hoping she'd come back. Not because I didn't believe she was sorry. But because something had finally ended. Cleanly. Honestly. For the first time in months, maybe years, there were no games. Just truth. That night, I didn't drink. I didn't scroll through old photos. I didn't text Hannah. I just sat with myself, in the quiet, in the aftermath, and I realized something important. This wasn't failure. It was release. Rachel and I didn't speak for a while after that. No angry follow-ups. No desperate reconciliations. Just logistics. Moving boxes. Address changes. Bank accounts. Once, she left a note inside one of the boxes. Thank you for not yelling. For listening. For letting me say it out loud. I didn't write back. Some things don't need answers. Weeks later, I saw Evan at a coffee shop. He avoided eye contact, took his latte, and walked out like I was a ghost. Good. He should feel haunted. When I told my parents, my mom cried. My dad offered to help me move the furniture. I told them it was mutual. That wasn't a lie. Because in the end, we both chose the silence. We both left the door open too long and pretended we didn't hear it creak. I still thought about Hannah. Not in a desperate, aching way, but in the way you think about something that could have been something else if the timing had been different. And maybe one day it still could be. But for now, I needed to sit with the version of me I'd been avoiding. The one who gave too much, who stayed too long, who fought for someone who stopped fighting back. And forgive him. It had been 3 months since Rachel left for good. Long enough for the dust to settle, short enough for her name to still echo in the hallway some mornings. I'd adjusted to the silence. Grown used to setting one plate for dinner. Learned how to sleep without waiting for the mattress to shift beside me. The strange part? It didn't hurt anymore. Not in the sharp, heart-ripping way it once did. Now, the pain was a dull ache. The kind that reminds you something used to live where there's now just space. And I'd started to like the space. I saw Hannah again on a Sunday afternoon. No plan. No pretense. Just a coincidence, or fate, depending on how poetic you want to get. Charlie was climbing the jungle gym at the park near my apartment. Hannah sat on a bench beneath a tree, sipping iced coffee, sunglasses perched in her hair, legs crossed. She looked relaxed. Whole. I almost walked past. But she looked up, and our eyes met, and the moment didn't belong to coincidence anymore. Hey, stranger, she said with a soft smile. I walked over, suddenly nervous in a way I hadn't felt in years. Mind if I sit? She patted the bench. It's public property. But yes, please. We watched Charlie for a few moments in silence. Then she said, I heard. Through the grapevine. I assume the grapevine is Marissa in HR. She grinned. You know it. I chuckled. Yeah, it's done. Official. Quiet. She glanced at me, eyes gentle. How do you feel? I took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. Lighter. Like I've stopped bracing for an argument every time I walk through my own door. She nodded. That's a good sign. And you? I asked. How have you been? She sipped her drink. Better. Therapy's helping. Work's still chaos. Charlie lost his first tooth. Big milestone. He left a note for the tooth fairy demanding $5 or he'd file a complaint. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. Smart kid, I said. Wonder where he gets it. She smiled, but didn't look at me. It's been strange. Not talking to you. I didn't want to make things harder, I said. You didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of someone else's mess. I wasn't caught, she said softly. I stepped in, eyes open. I turned to face her fully. I missed you. I missed you too. The words hung between us. Not heavy, not desperate, just true. Later, we walked slowly through the park while Charlie ran ahead. The leaves were starting to turn, early hints of autumn in the breeze. People passed us in pairs, couples, kids, the occasional jogger with headphones in, and the whole world tuned out. I didn't feel like I was pretending anymore. I've been thinking a lot about mirrors, I said. Hannah looked up at me. Okay, that's either poetic or terrifying. I laughed. I mean, for so long I only saw myself through Rachel. Through how she looked at me. Or didn't. Through what she said I was lacking. Or how she made me feel like I was too much. Hannah nodded slowly. I get that. But the thing is, I continued. You came in and held up a different mirror. One that said, hey, maybe you're not broken. Maybe you've just been unseen. She didn't speak right away. Then, that's a hell of a thing to say. It's the truth. We stopped by a bench, watching Charlie hang from the monkey bars like he was testing gravity for the first time. I looked at her. I'm not asking for anything. Not yet. I just wanted to say thank you for helping me see myself again. She turned to face me, her smile quiet, real. You know, she said, when I left my ex, I promised myself I wouldn't settle for someone who made me feel like a placeholder again. I don't want to be a placeholder. I know. We stood there, two people who had been burned and bruised but not broken. People who'd been played and had played games themselves, but who now stood on the edge of something else. Not a rebound. Not a performance. Just possibility. A few days later, she texted me. Charlie wants to know if you like pizza with pineapple. I texted back. I do. And I'm willing to fight him for the last slice. She replied with a winking emoji and an address. It wasn't a dramatic ending. No rain-soaked reunions or desperate declarations. Just me, knocking on a door that opened before I could even second-guess it. Hannah answered wearing socks with mismatched stripes and a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. Charlie shouted from the kitchen, I already claimed the big slice. I shouted back, then I get two small ones. He squealed with laughter. And just like that, I stepped inside. Reflection isn't always neat. Sometimes it shows you things you hate. Sometimes it shows you who you've let yourself become. But if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, it also shows you who you could still be. Not as revenge, not as rebound, but as someone worth choosing again, and again, and again,